Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're the show that gives you that shortcut to being genuinely well-informed. We sift through sources, notes, research. Basically, we do the homework so you get the key insights.
That's the idea. And today we're tackling something, well, incredibly complex and very human. India's whole approach to refugees.
Yeah, it's a big one. Our mission today is really to get under the surface, unravel the real story behind India's stance. We're looking beyond just the borders.
And into the broken homes, the hopes for healing. It's about how India tries to balance compassion, its own security needs, and, of course, sovereignty.
And we're basing this deep dive on some really interesting material, specifically Chapter 4 from India's refugee question, Borders, Humanity, and Politics. So let's get into it.
Okay.
So maybe the place to start is this historical role India's played. I mean, for decades, it's been a haven, right? A temporary home, sometimes permanent, for thousands who are stateless or fleeing persecution. It's quite a history.
It absolutely is. And it's not just one group. The sources really highlight the diversity here. You've got the Tibetans, a huge influx in the 1950s.
Right, and Dharamshala becoming this global hub for Tibetan exile, even the Dalai Lama living there. That's pretty significant.
Hugely symbolic, yeah. But like you said, not just Tibetans. There were the Chakma and Hajong tribes fleeing East Pakistan, which is now Bangladesh.
Then later, Sri Lankan Tamils in the 80s.
Exactly. And Afghans, too, during the Soviet era and then again under the Taliban. More recently, the Rohingyas escaping the crackdown in Myanmar. It's a long list.
It really is. And what makes it even more, striking is that India hasn't actually signed the main international agreement, the 1951 UN Refugee Convention.
Right. That's often the first thing people point out.
So how does that work? How do
Yeah.
you offer asylum on such a scale without being part of that formal UN framework?
Well, this is where India's own legal system comes in, and it's quite unique. The Constitution doesn't explicitly say refugee.
No specific law for them.
Not a dedicated national law, no. But Article 21, the right to life and personal liberty, that's been interpreted pretty broadly by India's Supreme Court over the years.
Ah, so the court stepped in?
You could say that. Through judicial interpretation, Article 21 has often been used to protect non-citizens in distress. It acts as a kind of de facto protection, filling the gap left by not having a specific refugee law or being part of the convention.
Okay, so a uniquely Indian solution, judicially driven. But things haven't stayed the same, have they? The sources suggest there's been a big shift recently. The whole landscape seems to be changing.
That's really the core of the issue now. In recent years, the whole refugee question in India has become much more politicized. It wasn't always this charged.
What's driving that?
Several things bubbling up. Concerns about national security, worries about illegal immigration becoming much louder, and importantly, issues of communal identity are right at the forefront now.
And this has led to some really difficult situations, like with the Rohingya refugees, mostly Muslim, facing legal battles, threats of being sent back.
Exactly. And perhaps the most visible example of this shift is the Citizenship Amendment Act, the CAA, from 2019.
Right, the CAA. That caused a huge amount of debate. It offered a faster path to citizenship, but only for non-Muslim refugees from specific neighboring countries, Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Pakistan.
Precisely. And the reaction was immediate and polarized. Critics slammed it as discriminatory, fundamentally undermining India's secular foundations.
While supporters framed it as necessary protection for persecuted minorities from those countries.
Yes. But the key takeaway, the real insight from the sources here, is that the CAA marked this explicit turn. It introduced religious criteria into citizenship considerations related to refugees in a way that hadn't happened before. That act really forced a re-examination of India's image as this secular humanitarian haven.
It definitely put that image under scrutiny. And you mentioned the politics blurring lines. This seems connected to another core challenge, telling the difference between a refugee and an immigrant. Easy to mix up, but legally distinct, right?
Very distinct and crucial to understand. A refugee, technically, is fleeing persecution, war, violence, that kind of thing. An immigrant is usually moving for, say, economic opportunities, looking for a better job or life.
But in India, that line gets fuzzy.
It often does, yeah.
Right.
Take migrants from Bangladesh, for instance. Many come looking for work, so you'd think economic migrant.
Yeah.
But are some also escaping difficult conditions or facing discrimination back home? It's hard to neatly separate those motivations for every single person, especially at the border.
And that fuzziness must create huge policy headaches.
Immense headaches, especially in border states like Assam, where you have these really sensitive dynamics around local identity, land, resources. Demographics are a big deal.
Which brings us to the NRC, the National Register of Citizens in Assam. That was directly tied to this, wasn't it?
Directly. The NRC process there was an attempt explicitly to sort of clean the records, identify who was genuinely an Indian citizen versus who was deemed an illegal immigrant.
But the outcome?
The outcome was, well, incredibly disruptive and painful. It left almost 1.9 million people in this state of limbo, suddenly stateless, effectively.
Wow. 1.9 million. And many of them were born in India.
Yes, many had lived there for generations, knew no other home, but they couldn't produce the specific documents required by the NRC process.
Just thinking about being in limbo like that, what does that actually mean for someone's life day to day?
It means living under a constant cloud of uncertainty, no proper legal status, often difficulty accessing basic things like health care, maybe education for kids, trouble getting official ID, problems working legally or traveling. Your whole sense of belonging is just pulled out from under you.
That's incredibly tough. So stepping back, how does all this play out on the world stage? India has these aspirations, right? A rising global power, a moral voice, particularly for the global south.
It does. Big aspirations.
But then you have stories about deportations or groups like the Rohingya being marginalized. How does that square with the image India wants to project? Is it seen globally as compassionate or more cautious now?
That's the tension, isn't it? Perception versus reality. International media often highlights this contrast, India's democratic ideals versus some of these harder stances on refugees.
So the reality is mixed.
Very mixed.
Yeah.
India does still provide refuge to many groups. That hasn't stopped entirely. But it's happening without that single consistent national law we talked about. So you get what the sources call a patchwork policy.
Patchwork, meaning?
Meaning some communities might find refuge, might be tacitly accepted or even supported, while others face immense legal uncertainty, deportation threats.
Yeah.
It's inconsistent.
Okay. And how does India stack up compared to other countries?
Well, the sources draw contrasts. You look at Germany, for example, and it's relatively open, welcome to Syrian refugees a few years back. Then you look at, say, Australia, with its extremely strict border controls and offshore processing.
Two very different ends of the spectrum.
Exactly. And India seems to be somewhere in the middle, trying to balance humanitarian impulses with growing security concerns and sovereignty issues. It's often described as walking this very fine tightrope.
Okay, so given this complex tightrope walk, what's the way forward? Do the experts in the source material offer any solutions or recommendations?
They do offer several concrete suggestions, yeah. First off, the idea of creating a proper national refugee law, something that brings clarity and consistency, balancing compassion with predictable procedures.
So formalizing the ad hoc system.
Pretty much. Another big suggestion is for India to actually join the UN Refugee Convention. But, and this is crucial perhaps with specific reservations or conditions tailored to India's unique situation and concerns, not just signing wholesale, but engaging with the international framework on its own terms.
Interesting. So join, but adapt it. What else?
Working more closely with neighbors, but developing regional protocols for refugees within South Asia, a cooperative approach rather than each country dealing with it in isolation.
That makes sense given flows are often regional.
Right. And then there's technology, investing in robust digital identity systems. The idea is these could help protect both citizens and genuine refugees by clarifying who is who, reducing that uncertainty we talked about, potentially streamlining aid.
And protecting the vulnerable, particularly children?
Absolutely. Ensuring refugee kids get access to education, healthcare that's highlighted as a fundamental humanitarian step, regardless of the broader legal framework.
And the potential payoff for India if it takes these steps.
The experts argue it could significantly boost India's global standing, not just as an economic powerhouse or a military force, but as a genuinely compassionate global leader, aligning its actions more closely with those moral aspirations.
Which brings us right back to the human side of all this, because these aren't just policy debates or legal arguments.
No, not at all.
We're talking about people, individuals, families, people with real stories, real trauma, but also real hopes and dreams for safety, for a future.
Exactly. They're not just numbers in a report.
And it makes you think. As India writes its next chapter, its story of rising influence, maybe the way it treats the most vulnerable people who arrive at its door. Maybe that tells us more about the strength of its national character, its soul, than anything else.
That's a profound way to put it. It really cuts to the heart of the matter.
So maybe the question we leave you, the listener, with is this. When you weigh up national sovereignty, security concerns, and basic humanitarian impulses, what responsibility do nations really have to those fleeing persecution? Especially when things like internal demographics and political identity politics get thrown into the mix. Where does that balance truly lie? Something to definitely keep thinking about.